I stood on the front porch of my own house and couldn't open the door. The key, the same brass one I had used for 17 years, no longer fit. I turned it again, slower this time, thinking maybe grief was messing with my hands. But the lock didn't turn, not even a click. For a second, I thought maybe I had grabbed the wrong keys. Maybe this wasn't even my house. Maybe the fog in my chest had crawled up into my brain and made me forget everything. But then I saw the planter with the cracked edge that Daniel refused to throw away. The old chimes he gave me for our 10th anniversary still swaying on the porch, and the dent on the left side of the garage where I had once backed into a rake. No, this was my house. Except I couldn't get in. There were 2 cars in the driveway. One was my late husband's brother Stuart's truck. The other belonged to my mother-in-law, Darlene. They had parked like they owned the place, like they had always belonged there, like I hadn't just buried my husband 6 hours earlier. I knocked. Footsteps shuffled on hardwood. The front door opened halfway, and Stuart appeared with a tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. He didn't look surprised to see me. He didn't look like a man who had just lost his only brother. "Emma," he said, his voice too calm. "You shouldn't be here." I blinked. "Excuse me." He sighed. "Look, we didn't want to do this today, but it's better to be clear. Daniel didn't leave the house to you. It's still under his name, and he had discussed with Mom and me. If anything ever happened, the property would revert to family hands." I stared at him. "I am family." "You were," he said simply, as if he was discussing the weather. I looked past him. There were boxes inside, labeled, neatly stacked. Darlene's handbag sat on the arm of my favorite recliner. "You're moving in." My voice cracked. "Today? After the funeral?" "Daniel would have wanted it clean," he said. "Quick, not drawn out." I stepped back, dizzy. I hadn't even changed out of my black dress. I still had the funeral program in my hand. He never told me this. Stuart tilted his head. "Maybe he didn't trust you to handle it." That cut through everything else. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shove the door open and rip down every box they had stacked. I wanted to throw the urn that sat in my car, Daniel's urn, through the window, just to remind them that whatever they thought, he had loved me for 17 years. But I didn't move. I couldn't. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. Stuart shrugged. "You'll figure it out. You always do." Then he closed the door. Click. That was the sound I had been waiting for all day. Just not like this. Earlier that morning, I had stood in the church foyer surrounded by people I barely recognized. Darlene had sat up front like a queen mother, soaking in attention, while I was too hollow to cry. Stuart had given the eulogy. He hadn't mentioned me once. I had convinced myself it was just grief, that they were acting strange because they were broken inside. Now I understood. They were planning this all along. By the time I got back in my car, my hands were shaking so hard I dropped the keys. I picked them up, gripping them until the edges dug into my palm. These keys meant nothing now. I drove aimlessly for nearly an hour before pulling into the driveway of someone I hadn't seen in nearly a year, Karen, my old friend from high school. She opened the door in pajamas and gasped when she saw my face. "I have nowhere to go," I whispered. She stepped aside. "Then you're staying here." That night, I sat on her couch with a blanket wrapped around me and a cup of microwave tea in my hands. I stared at nothing. I replayed every moment of the funeral, every word Stuart had said, every box I had seen behind him. And somewhere between midnight and morning, one thought became clear in my mind. They weren't grieving. They were preparing. And I had just stepped into a war I didn't even know had begun. The morning light felt wrong. It spilled through Karen's window like it didn't know my life had ended. I woke on her couch, still in the black dress from the funeral, now wrinkled and clinging to me like a memory I couldn't peel off. My shoes were on the floor, neatly placed side by someone who had cared enough to do it. Not me. I hadn't even remembered taking them off. Karen was in the kitchen, Scrambling eggs like this was just any Tuesday. But the way she glanced at me, it wasn't pity. It was something softer, like she was holding her breath for me. "Morning," she said. "I wasn't sure what you eat, but you need something." I nodded. I didn't want food, but I wanted her effort to mean something. As I sat at her kitchen table, she finally asked, "Emma, what the hell happened yesterday?" So I told her. Not all of it. Not the way Stuart looked at me like I was a guest in my own life. Not the way the lock had resisted me like I was an intruder. Just enough to let her know that I wasn't safe anymore. When I mentioned the house, she stopped stirring. "But your name's not on the deed." I shook my head. It was Daniel's before we got married. He never updated it. After 17 years, I let that question hang in the air. I didn't have an answer. The truth was, we never thought it mattered. We had no children, no major fights, no reason to think anything would go wrong. We were one of those quiet, boring couples who held hands in parking lots and argued about grocery lists. Until one day, Daniel's heart just stopped. No warning. No godbis. Now I was just a widow on paper. And apparently not even that. By noon, I was on the phone with the lawyer who had handled Daniel's will. His voice was crisp, formal, polished like a man who rarely had to deal with emotion. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Bradford," he said, "but the house was not transferred to your name, and there was no updated will after 2014. The official beneficiary is listed as his mother, Darlene Taylor." My heart sank. "But we were married." "Yes, and as surviving spouse, you may have a claim, but only if we can demonstrate intent or challenge the distribution. I must warn you, that's difficult without a legal paper trail." I laughed bitterly. "So, 17 years together mean nothing?" Silence. Then he added, "I wish I had better news." I hung up and stared at the wall for a long time. Karen didn't ask what he said. She just placed a blanket over my shoulders and sat down next to me. I think that was the first moment I truly broke. Not when Daniel died, not even when they locked me out of the house, but when I realized I had built an entire life inside someone else's paperwork, and it could be erased just like that. By that evening, Darlene had changed the locks, hired a cleaning crew, and posted a photo of herself in my kitchen on Facebook with the caption, "Back home where I belong." I didn't see it, but Karen's daughter did, and when she showed me, I felt something inside me split open. Not grief, not sadness, not even rage, just clarity. They weren't just taking my home. They were rewriting the story, and if they wanted to pretend I never existed, then I would show them exactly who I was when I did. The next morning, I returned to the courthouse, not the one with judges and marble floors, but the county records office, tucked behind the DMV in a building that still smelled like mildew and bureaucracy. It wasn't revenge I was after. It was proof that Daniel had meant to do better, that I wasn't just an afterthought, a placeholder until death. I waited in line behind a man arguing about a property tax notice and a woman registering a boat she said she didn't even want. When it was finally my turn, the clerk barely looked up. "Name?" "Emma Bradford." "I'm trying to find property documents tied to Daniel Bradford. He passed away last week." She typed slowly. "Do you have his social?" I handed her a wrinkled copy of the death certificate and the old mortgage statement. She scanned it, then raised an eyebrow. "There's a transfer request here, dated January 3rd of this year. Notarized but not filed." My breath caught. "What does that mean?" She turned the screen so I could see. There it was in Daniel's familiar handwriting. The deed transfer form with my name filled in as grantee. It had a signature, a notary stamp, but one box remained unchecked, recorded in county system. It means he filled it out, got it notarized, but he never brought it in to file. I stared at the screen. 1,000 moments between us came rushing back. The way he'd kissed my forehead that night after New Year's dinner, whispered something about taking care of things. the folder I'd found on his desk with post-it notes that said, "Call Monday." He had tried. He just didn't get the chance. I asked for a certified copy and left the building gripping it like a lifeline. When I got to Karen's car, I cried. Not because it solved everything. It didn't. But because for the first time since the world broke, I felt seen. He hadn't forgotten me. They had. Back at her place, I spread out every document we had, marriage license, joint bank statements, utility bills with both our names. Karen hovered nearby, her fingers twitching with the need to help. Then I found something else, buried in an envelope marked Bradford Private. It was Daniel's letter to his lawyer, dated just 4 days before he died. "Please begin drafting the updated will. Emma gets the house. Full ownership. No life estate garbage. She built this place with me, room by room. I'll drop by next week to sign everything." I pressed my hand to the page. My tears smeared his signature. "Karen," I whispered, "they took everything. And still it was mine. It was always supposed to be mine." She looked at me the way people look at shattered things they can't glue back together. And then she said something I'll never forget. "Emma, grief doesn't make people cruel. It reveals who they already were." That night I didn't sleep. I sat in Karen's guest room with a stack of files and an ache in my chest I couldn't name. It wasn't just mourning Daniel anymore. It was mourning the version of me that thought loyalty was enough. They had underestimated me. But worse than that, they had underestimated him. And now I had a choice. Let them bury me in silence, or speak, with everything he left behind. It was just past 4:30 in the afternoon when I pulled up to the house on Riverbend Lane. My house. The golden hour sun spilled across the porch Daniel and I had painted together. The shutters were now a different color, his sister's favorite sage green. There were new lawn chairs, wind chimes, and on the front door hung a spring wreath I didn't recognize. A stranger's home. But I wasn't a stranger. I rang the bell. It took a moment, then footsteps approached. Heavy, rushed, irritated. Pamela opened the door, wine glass in hand, lips painted crimson. "Oh," she blinked. "You." She didn't move aside. "You're not supposed to be here." I held up the deed transfer. She didn't look at it. "You can't just barge in, Emma. This isn't a movie." "No," I said, stepping forward, "it's not. Because in movies, the widow isn't erased 5 days after the funeral." Her hand dropped from the doorknob, but she didn't back away. Voices floated from inside. Laughter, clinking silverware, someone playing piano off-key. They were celebrating. I walked past her. In the dining room, the whole family was gathered. Daniel's brother Paul, his niece Harper, even the cousin who hadn't spoken to us in 5 years. They were seated around the long mahogany table I had refinished with Daniel the summer before his diagnosis. At the head of the table sat her Mary, Daniel's mother, still wearing black, still playing grieving matriarch. "Oh," she said when she saw me, "you must be lost." I placed the file folder on the table. Daniel's letter, the unfiled deed, the notarized affidavit I'd obtained that morning. "No," I said quietly. "I came to return what's mine." Paul scoffed. "Emma, if this is about the will—" "It's not," I cut in. "It's about the truth." I pulled out the letter. "Read it aloud." When I finished, the room was silent. Harper was the first to speak. "He left it to you?" I nodded. Mary's mouth curled. "Unfiled documents mean nothing, dear. The law is clear." I met her eyes. "And so is intent." She started to protest, but I held up one more paper. A formal notice of legal petition for estate dispute, filed in my name, with an injunction request to bar further use of the property until the court reviewed rightful ownership. Silence. No piano. No laughter. Only the quiet tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. I looked at each of them. Faces once familiar, now masks of discomfort and greed. Pamela spoke from behind me. "You think this makes you look dignified?" I turned. No, I said softly. It makes me look done. I walked out without waiting for applause, without turning back, because the woman who used to wait for permission to belong was gone. I sat in the back corner of the Charleston County Courthouse, room 6B, clutching the folder I'd carried with me for weeks, but had only opened a dozen times. The courtroom was nearly empty. A few people waited for traffic hearings, one young couple holding hands in a custody dispute. No one knew me. No one cared what had been stolen, except me. The clerk finally called my name. I walked to the front and handed over the documents, the handwritten letter, the signed transfer, Daniel's will, and the timeline of events from the moment he passed to the moment they changed the locks on me. I'd like to file a motion to contest the estate transfer, I said. My voice didn't shake. Name of the defendant? The clerk asked. I breathed in through my nose. Mary Ellen Barrett, his mother, and then after a pause, and Pamela Green, his sister. They currently reside at the disputed property. The woman nodded, stapled the packet, and stamped it. And just like that, it was real. 3 days later, they received notice. Pamela called that evening. I didn't pick up. The voicemail was short, full of rage, and ended with, "You'll regret this." I deleted it. Regret? No. I regretted not seeing the signs sooner. I regretted thinking family meant protection. But I didn't regret fighting back, because something shifted the day I walked into that courtroom. For the first time since Daniel's death, I felt like I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was moving. The legal battle wasn't fast. It never is. But it was thorough. My lawyer, Carla Jenkins, was a quiet woman with a face carved by years in probate litigation. She didn't offer sympathy. She offered strategy. On our second meeting, she flipped through Daniel's handwritten letter and said simply, "This changes everything." He didn't update the formal will, but this, combined with the unfiled deed and the signed affidavit, this shows intent. We can argue undue interference. She leaned back. "You're going to need to be patient and calm. They'll come after your character. They'll say you were unstable, that he wasn't of sound mind." I nodded. I'd rehearsed it all in my head already. What I didn't expect was the surveillance video. Carla discovered it 2 weeks into the investigation. A security camera from the pharmacy Daniel used in his final months had captured audio. March 10th, 6 days before his death. Daniel, frail and hunched, sat at the counter filling out a prescription. Pamela stood behind him, arguing with someone on the phone. "You can't let her keep the house," she snapped. "She's not even blood. I don't care what he says. He's delirious half the time anyway." The clerk heard. The camera heard. And now the court would hear it too. That changed everything. Suddenly, we weren't just fighting for a house. We were fighting to prove that in his final days, Daniel was manipulated by the people who claimed to love him most. Carla submitted the recording with a supplemental statement. And from that moment on, the energy shifted. Mary didn't show up to the first hearing. Pamela did, alone, pale, trembling slightly. She didn't speak when the judge read out the recording's transcript. She didn't make eye contact when I passed her in the hallway. And when Carla leaned in and whispered, "They're going to settle," I can feel it. I didn't feel triumph. Not yet. Because it wasn't just about the house. It was about erasing me. And that would take more than one court date to undo. The email arrived at 8:12 a.m., subject line in all caps, "Settlement Proposal." It was from Pamela's attorney, a sleek, boutique firm out of Atlanta that probably charged $600 an hour just to spell my name wrong. I didn't open it at first. Just stared at the notification blinking on my phone while my coffee went cold on the windowsill. Part of me hoped it was an apology. I should have known better. Inside the PDF was a single-page offer. $175,000 in cash, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. I vacate all claims to Daniel's estate. I sign an NDA. I walk away. Carla called me within the hour. "They're scared," she said. "This isn't about being generous. This is about shutting you up before discovery, forces things into the open. I nodded slowly, scrolling down to the signature line. They really think I'd sell my silence, I murmured. Like that house, that man, that grief can be priced out. They don't know you, Carla said quietly. That night, I sat at the dining table with the documents spread out under the dim kitchen light. The house I was renting smelled like varnish and mold, temporary like everything else in my life. I stared at the line that read, Emma will agree not to discuss the events surrounding Mr. Barrett's estate publicly or with any party not directly involved in legal counsel. And I thought of Daniel, the way his hand trembled that last week, the way Pamela never looked up from her phone when the nurse explained the hospice schedule, the way Mary Ellen refused to hug me at the funeral. You're not really one of us, she'd said, like it was a fact, not an insult. I printed out the last photo of me and Daniel together, us laughing on the back porch with mugs of cider and the dog between us, 3 weeks before the diagnosis. I slid it into a plastic sleeve and placed it atop the documents. Then I wrote across the offer in permanent black marker, Your money means nothing to me. Carla sent them our rejection the next morning. No counter, no compromise. Let them squirm. Let them worry what the court would hear next. Because I wasn't done yet. 2 weeks passed in silence. Then a knock at the door. I opened it to find Mary Ellen herself on my doorstep. No makeup, no pearls, no smug smile. Just her, in a beige windbreaker, holding a bag of lemon cookies I used to bake for Daniel on cold days. I thought we could talk, she said. I didn't move. I know you're angry, she began, but we've all lost so much. I folded my arms. You lost a son. I lost my husband. But only one of us was locked out of their own home less than a week after the funeral. She didn't respond. I came because I wanted to give you this. She handed me a box, velvet, navy, old. Inside was Daniel's watch, the one I thought was buried with him. It was in his nightstand, she said, voice cracking. He wanted you to have it. I couldn't, or wouldn't. I asked. Silence again. I didn't come to fight, she whispered. I came to ask if we could move on. I looked at the watch, then back at her. You stole my name from the mailbox, I said. You changed the locks, the title, the will. And you want me to just move on. I'm tired, she said simply. I nodded. So am I. And then I closed the door. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not the kind of cold you feel in your bones, but the sterile, humming air of a place where nothing kind ever happens. The kind of room where people decide who gets to keep what after the love has rotted out of it. Carla leaned toward me, whispering, Let them underestimate you. I didn't answer. My hands were shaking, but I kept them in my lap. Across the aisle sat Pamela in a tailored navy suit, her pearl earrings glinting under the fluorescence. She looked like she was attending a charity gala, not a hearing to determine whether she'd illegally seized control of her dead son's estate. The judge, a silver-haired woman named Miriam Chin, called things to order. Her eyes were sharp, unblinking. Then came the evidence. Emails between Pamela and Daniel's financial advisor, dated just 2 days after his first chemo round. She'd asked about emergency transfer protocols. Next, a voice memo from Daniel's hospice nurse, verifying that I was listed as his primary decision-maker and had been removed without being informed. Carla handed over copies of Daniel's original will, notarized, dated back to 2021, the one where he'd named me not only as his wife but sole heir cosigner, an executor of all posthumous affairs. Then she revealed the smoking gun, a second will, supposedly signed by Daniel in his final week, where everything had been rewritten to favor Pamela and Mary Ellen. There was just one problem. Daniel's signature was perfect, too perfect, the kind of perfect that only shows up when someone traces it from a scanned PDF. Carla held both versions up under the projector. You could see the pressure points, the hesitation in the second signature. It wasn't handwriting, it was mimicry, There was a ripple across the room. Pamela stiffened. Mary Ellen's hand flew to her mouth. Carla turned toward the bench. "We believe this second will is not only invalid," she said evenly, "but criminally fraudulent." Gasps broke out. The judge banged her gavel. Pamela's attorney asked for a recess. I sat motionless, watching the empire they'd tried to build around Daniel's death crumble at the edges. For the first time, I saw Pamela's hands tremble. For the first time, I didn't feel like the intruder. That night, I walked out of the courthouse with Carla at my side. No one followed me. No reporters. No glares. No family members calling me gold digger. Or not a real Barrett. Just me, and the echo of Daniel's voice in my memory. "Promise me," he once whispered, during a fever dream in January, "if they try to take you down, you don't let them." I didn't. I had stayed. I had fought. And now, the judge had frozen all accounts tied to the disputed will. A full investigation was underway. Pamela could be facing charges. For the first time since Daniel died, I wasn't the one scrambling to survive. I was the one holding the line. A week after the hearing, a certified envelope arrived at Carla's office, marked private, to be handed to Mrs. Emma Barrett only. It was from Daniel's old lawyer, someone he'd worked with years before his illness. Inside was a handwritten note and a key. Carla called me in without explaining. Her face was unreadable. I sat down, my hands suddenly clammy. She slid the envelope across the desk, no words. I opened it slowly. The letter was in Daniel's handwriting. Messy, familiar, tender. "Emma, if you're reading this, it means the worst has happened, but also that you survived it. I never wanted you to have to fight my mother, or the vultures circling around after my diagnosis. But I knew they'd come. I know her. So I prepared something, a little quiet justice, just in case. You remember the cabin? The one in Blue Ridge, where we spent our first real New Year's. It's yours. And not just the cabin. I sold the lake property years ago and invested it in a trust under your name only. Carla knows. You just had to make it through the fire to receive it. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you in person, but I hope this helps you start over on your terms. Don't come back to the house. Don't let them make you small again. Build something better. Yours. Always, D." I didn't cry. Not right away. I sat there in stunned silence, the paper trembling in my hands, as if Daniel had reached from beyond the grave, not to save me, but to remind me I had saved myself. 2 weeks later, I stood on the porch of the cabin. It was smaller than I remembered. The wood slightly warped from rain, the door creaky, but it was mine, every inch of it. No ghosts in the closet, no eyes watching me over morning coffee. Just trees, sky, and quiet. Carla had handled the rest. Pamela was now under investigation for will tampering, fraud, and possible financial abuse. Mary Ellen had issued a public apology after being dropped from her job at a luxury real estate firm. The media that once painted me as the suspicious wife now called me the widow who fought back. But I didn't care about the headlines. I cared about standing barefoot on the wood deck in the early morning fog, holding a mug of coffee Daniel would have hated, listening to the birds, and breathing without guilt. That weekend, I unpacked a single box. Inside was a photo from the day we moved into our old home. Daniel was grinning, covered in paint. I had taped a note to the frame. This was not the end. I placed it on the mantel and walked outside. A small group of neighbors was gathering down the trail for the local farmers market. Someone waved. I smiled back, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like a shadow haunting someone else's life. I felt like the author of my own beginning.